In this fortnight's episode, Ross Ulbricht gets life in prison. Cops are really pissing me off. And why don't you just move to Somalia?
Welcome to The Lava Flow, channeling the flow of information to the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, and agorist community. Find us at thelavaflow.com. Here's your host, Roger Paxton.
Thank you for joining me this week. Coming to you from Lava HQ. Flowing from the state where Elvis Presley got his famous televised haircut after proving that we're all slaves, able to be drafted against our will at any time. This is the show that will bring you the people, places, and events that everyone in the Liberty Revolution needs to know. You can catch me on Twitter at the Lava Flow Pod. It's Tuesday, June 9th, 2015, and this is episode 13, the Silk Road to Hell edition. What's wrestling my jimmies this week? You're about to find out. Let's do it to it. Ross Ulbricht, the alleged Dread Pirate Roberts, who started and ran the Silk Road Darknet site, was sentenced last week to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was convicted back in February on 7 charges, including narcotics trafficking, distribution of narcotics by means of the internet, narcotics trafficking conspiracy, continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy to aid and abet computer hacking, conspiracy to traffic in fraudulent identity documents, and money laundering conspiracy. Notice anything missing in these charges? I didn't notice it back when he was sentenced, but I notice it now. There is not a single charge related to the supposed 6 murders for hire that Ross was accused of initiating. These supposed murders for hire were used when he was arrested as justification for denying him bail. Of all of the crimes that he was accused of, the most heinous were the alleged murders for hire. Why did these mysteriously disappear, and why was he not tried for these? Before I answer that, I have something to answer for myself. Back in episode 5 of this podcast, I made the case that if the allegations on these murder for hires were true, then, quote, this means Ulbricht is a thug. A libertarian thug, but still a thug. Those were my words. I still stand by that statement, that if these things were true, then he's a thug. However, after a bunch of research and digging, I believe I can say almost certainly that Ross Ulbricht in no way ordered the assassination of anyone. I fully believe that the allegations for these assassinations were nothing more than lies told by the prosecution to make the judge and potential jurors see Ulbricht as a monster capable of anything. If they had even a shred of evidence pointing to Ulbricht ordering assassinations of people, they would have charged him of those crimes and used it in court for everything that it was worth. But since in court you actually do have to present evidence of allegations instead of just making conjecture or be held in contempt, they knew better than to try him for these crimes, since apparently they had no evidence for it. The scrutiny of the courtroom would have shown these allegations to be exactly what they are, complete bullshit. So the prosecution conveniently dropped those charges before the case went to trial. As Reason magazine said on these charges, quote, given the amazing water muddying the prosecution achieved by talking about, but never trying, Ulbricht for, or providing in court beyond a reasonable doubt, allegedly planned but never executed murders for hire, one wonders whether the judge allowed any thoughts of those rumors, even subconsciously, to shape her sentencing decision. Considering that we can all point to countless cases of rapists and murderers getting less prison time than Ross did, this is a disgusting travesty of justice. If Ross really did create the Silk Road, as he said he did in a gut-wrenching letter he sent to the judge asking for leniency, then all he was guilty of was providing a safe, healthy place for people to voluntarily buy and sell things that could get them hurt or killed for buying and selling on the street. He saved countless lives. He also protected countless people from theft, since the Silk Road set up escrow services for its sales to ensure that the seller received his money and that the buyer received his product and that product was good. Every single sale done on the Silk Road was a safe, voluntary transaction, and there is no way to calculate how much violence it saved people from. In his letter to the judge, Ulbricht wrote, quote, "I've had my youth, and I know you must take away my middle years, but please leave me my old age. Please leave a small light at the end of the tunnel, an excuse to stay healthy, an excuse to dream of better days ahead, and a chance to redeem myself in the free world before I meet my maker." This judge instead decided to give him the maximum penalty she could, after she already gave him a trial that, as Daryl Perry said, would be called a kangaroo trial if that weren't offensive to kangaroos. Josh Dradel, Ulbricht's attorney, will be appealing this conviction on several counts, since this trial was done in such a shoddy manner. One reason it will likely be appealed is that it was kept completely secret until after Ulbricht was convicted that 2 of the federal agents involved in the Silk Road investigation were charged with mass criminality, including Bitcoin theft from the government and others, and attempted blackmail of the Dread Pirate Roberts. Although the investigation into these 2 agents began 9 months before Ulbricht's trial, it was kept from the defense until 5 weeks before trial, at which point prosecutors successfully moved to keep the information sealed until after the trial. Another possible point of appeal would be the potential Fourth Amendment violations due to the mysterious way that the FBI broke into Silk Road servers, since every security specialist that's been asked said it is impossible that the FBI entered the servers the way that they said they did. Ross has been screwed from day one in this case, and we all need to be standing in solidarity with him on this. I encourage each of you to write to Ross. On the Free Ross page, they say that, quote, "You can send Ross mail or reprints of interesting articles. He especially likes to read about economics, politics, science, but anything you like," end quote. I'll be writing to him this week, and I hope you do the same. You can write to him at Ross Ulbricht, number 18870-111, MCC, New York Metropolitan Correctional Center, 150 Park Row, New York, New York, 10007-1780. That address will also be in the show notes of this episode at thelavaflow.com/13, in case you weren't able to catch that. I also encourage you to watch the documentary Deep Web, which goes into detail on the Silk Road, the dark web, and this trial. You can watch it on Epix, or you can download a torrent of the movie if you don't have Epix. It's well worth the watch. The good news is that the dark web is still going strong, even after Ross's conviction and harsh sentence. I have been, for the first time ever, exploring the dark web myself, and I'm fascinated by it. I will soon be bringing you some reports from the dark web, including a step-by-step tutorial for getting on the dark web as securely as possible. I will even be making a purchase using these steps to make sure that it works myself. Make sure to stay tuned for that. Have you subscribed to the Lava Flow on iTunes or any mobile device yet? Then what's wrong with you? Go to thelavaflow.com/subscribe so you don't miss a minute of the show. And while you're subscribing, make sure to leave me a 5-star rating and review the show to help others find our podcast. thelavaflow.com/subscribe.
What's in the news? The news you need to know from a libertarian perspective.
It's amazing to me that sometimes I have to dig and dig to find relevant news to put in this segment. But then there are weeks like this episode where I literally have to drop good news items because there's just so much to put in here. In Mass Surveillance is Dead, Long Live Mass Surveillance news, the much talked about Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act was not reauthorized by the U.S. Senate before it sunsetted. This was great news until just a couple of days later when the USA Freedom Act was passed to replace it. We're supposed to somehow believe that the Freedom Act limits this mass surveillance, or at least that's what our rulers are telling us, but I just don't buy it, and neither do many others. The Freedom of the Press Foundation said, quote, "The USA Freedom Act supposedly bans bulk collection of phone records or any other private records, and we certainly hope that it actually does. But its provisions are vague and confusing, leading many legal experts to believe they could be reinterpreted in secret by NSA lawyers with a history of warping the common definitions of ordinary words beyond recognition, and could lead the FISA court to continue to allow the NSA to collect large quantities of Americans' data in secret." And Edward Snowden had this to say, quote, "Though we've come a long way, the right to privacy remains under threat. Some of the world's most popular online services have been enlisted as partners in the NSA's mass surveillance programs, and technology companies are being pressured by governments around the world to work against their customers rather than for them. Billions of cell phone location records are still being intercepted without regard for the guilt or innocence of those affected. We have learned that our government intentionally weakens the fundamental security of the internet with backdoors that transform private lives into open books. Metadata revealing the personal associations and interests of ordinary internet users is still being intercepted and monitored on a scale unprecedented in history. As you read this online, the United States government makes a note." As Reason magazine said, quote, "To complicate things, your interpretation of the text may differ radically from that of the secret FISA court or someone in the Justice Department. Remember, an appeals court ruled that the now expired Section 215 of the Patriot Act did not authorize bulk data collection, and the author of the bill agreed. What's the moral here? Power thrives in complexity, just as roaches flourish in the dark. Complexity raises political transaction costs and thereby reduces public scrutiny and resistance. That's just how the politicians and bureaucrats like it. Comparing politicians and bureaucrats to roaches is just dead on. I love it. A group of civil liberties advocates, organizations, and surveillance experts, including such divergent groups as Campaign for Liberty, Democracy for America, Progressive Change Campaign Committee, Republican Liberty Caucus, Demand Progress, and many other groups had this to say. Quote, "The sacrifices made by the USA Freedom Act of 2015 are unacceptable. The modest changes within this bill, in turn, fail to reform mass surveillance of Americans and others conducted under Section 702 of the FISA Amendment Acts of 2008 and Executive Order 12333. Given intelligence agencies' eagerness to subvert any attempts by Congress to rein in massive surveillance programs by changing the legal authorities under which they operate, the modest proposed changes are no reform at all. My statement is this. If you honestly believe that mass surveillance is over, I have some oceanfront property to sell you in Arizona." In Laws Designed to Make Us All Criminals news, federal prosecutors charged Karulazan Medinov for destroying records under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, a law enacted by Congress in the wake of the Enron scandal. The law was, in part, intended to prohibit corporations under federal investigation from shredding incriminating documents. But since Sarbanes-Oxley was passed in 2002, federal prosecutors have applied the law to a much wider range of activities. What did Madinov do to get this charge? He cleared his browser history on his personal computer. As The Nation said in their recent article on this, Henny Farkery, a senior staff attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, says the Fed's broad interpretation of Sarbanes-Oxley in the digital age is part of a wider trend. Federal agents feeling entitled to digital data. Farkery compares the broad application of Sarbanes-Oxley in the digital realm to the federal government's resistance to cell phone companies that want to sell encrypted phones that would prevent law enforcement from being able to access users' data. When the new encrypted iPhone came out, FBI Director James Comey told reporters that he didn't understand why companies would, quote, market something expressly to allow people to place themselves beyond the law, end quote. At its core, Farkery said, what the government is saying is we have to create a mechanism that allows everybody's data to be open for inspection on the off chance that one day in the future, for whatever random circumstance, we need to see that data. Similarly, Fauqueroy says the government's underlying theory in cases like kennels is, don't even think about deleting anything that may be harmful to you, because we may come after you at some point in the future for some unforeseen reason, and we want to be able to have access to that data. And if we don't have access to that data, we're going to slap an obstruction charge that has a 20-year maximum on you. As more and more data are stored online, the government wants and believes it deserves access to that data for policing purposes. But Fauqueroy disagrees. Quote, the idea that you have to create a record of where you've gone or open all of your cupboards all the time and leave your front door unlocked and available for law enforcement inspection at any time is not the country we have established for ourselves more than 200 years ago. In security theater news this week, the Transportation Security Agency failed 95% of the security tests conducted by a Homeland Security Red Team, designed to check the effectiveness of the aviation security network. During the tests, DHS agents each tried to bring a banned item past TSA screeners, and they succeeded in 67 out of the 70 cases. In one test, an undercover agent was stopped after setting off an alarm at a magnetometer, but TSA screeners failed to detect a fake explosive device that was taped to his back during a follow-on pat-down. Officials would not divulge the exact time period of the testing other than to say it concluded recently. Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson was apparently so frustrated by the findings, he sought a detailed briefing of them last week at TSA's headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, according to sources. U.S. officials insisted changes have already been made at airports to address vulnerabilities identified by the latest tests. The acting head of the TSA was reassigned as a result of these failures. In reaffirming existing rights news, both houses of the legislature in the state of Texas have passed a law allowing for open carry of firearms in the state. While this is not true constitutional carry like some states have, since you will still have to have a concealed carry license in order to carry openly, this is still a big step in the right direction. My biggest concern about this law is that it allows police officers to ask to see the permit of everyone they see with a handgun being openly carried. This could turn into a nightmare scenario of papers, please for law-abiding citizens exercising their rights as a human being to arm themselves. Governor Greg Abbott is expected to sign this bill. In Corporatism Goes Deep news, it's been revealed that the Department of Defense has paid nearly $7 million over the last 3 years to the National Football League, quote, to publicly salute soldiers, hold pre-game re-enlistment ceremonies, and perform on-field American flag rollouts. Several U.S. senators are trying to have this practice stopped, and even trying to take the money back from the NFL to give to charities supporting troops, veterans, and their families. In Sometimes They Get It Right news, the U.S. House voted overwhelmingly last week to protect state medical marijuana programs from federal interference and to protect state hemp and CBD laws. This is on the heels of a vote last month by the U.S. Senate Appropriations Committee to lift the ban on Veterans Administration doctors recommending medical marijuana to their patients in states where it's legal. And even Facebook can get it right sometimes news, the social media giant Facebook has infuriated law enforcement by letting users add encryption keys to their profiles and to allow users to opt in to have notification emails sent in an encrypted format. But this strong pro-encryption statement comes as the U.S. government openly pleads with tech companies to move away from the technology. President Obama hasn't advocated for an outright ban on encryption yet, but nonetheless wants to be able to track communication when possible. Quote, when we have the ability to track online communication in a way that is legal, conforms with due process, rule of law, and presents oversight, then that's a capability we want to preserve, he said in January. According to The Hill, the president is now calling on lawmakers to update a 1994 wiretapping law to require tech companies to build a way for the government to access suspects' data. In the show notes to this episode, which you can find at thelavaflow.com/13, there will be links to Facebook's statement and instructions on how to turn on these new features and how to access Facebook using the Tor web browser for even more security. In The Nanny State Wants to Protect You from Everything news, the state of California has introduced new regulations that will require actors in the pornography industry to wear protective goggles while on set. I kid you not. The State Occupational Safety and Health Standards Board published these proposed sets of regulations to help prevent the spread of STDs. This is the product of no less than 5 years of hearings and research from the government agency, which details the preventative measures they say will keep performers safe. Give me a fucking break.
Exercise your free market muscles by going to thelavaflow.com/support and giving a per episode donation of as little as $1 an episode, or use Bitcoin. Get exclusive content, rewards, and help the Lava Flow become fiscally neutral while providing you more content. thelavaflow.com/support.
This is what happens when you call the cops. Say what? This is what happens when you call the cops. Come on. This is what happens when you call the cops. You get your rights violated or you all get shot. Pow. This is what happens when you call the cops.
I haven't visited this segment for quite some time, not due to a lack of material, but due to the way that this segment made me feel. It makes me angry seeing what is happening in the police state of America. There are few things that make me as angry as this one topic. Just ask my wife when she hears me rant about cases like I did today. This rant with her today is what inspired me to revisit this segment with 2 instances that really pissed me off today. The first one was an article about a SWAT team in St. Louis, Missouri, who raided a family home and killed their dog. What was their offense? Surely they were drug kingpins or serial killers, right? No. They had failed to pay 2 utilities bills. This raid actually happened last year, but the news this week was related to a federal lawsuit brought by the family against the police department. The Riverfront Times sums up the lawsuit saying, Zoric was at home with several family members and her pit bull Kia when a St. Louis County Police Tactical Response Unit burst through the door without knocking, according to her suit. The unit had at least 5 officers with M4 rifles supported by at least 8 uniformed officers. The officers entered so quickly, Zoric's suit alleges, that Kia didn't even have time to bark. A tactical officer fired 3 shots into the dog, and the dog's bladder and bowels released and she fell to the floor. The dog was lying on the floor in her own waste and blood, struggling to breathe. She had a gaping hole in her chest. Zoric claims the officer kept trying to talk to her about the natural gas bill, but she was focused on her dog, who she had raised as a puppy, and who, she says, had never shown aggression to any person. At one point in the raid, Zoric alleges an officer pointed his firearm at her son's head and said, "One word, motherfucker, and I'll put 3 in you." To a child. As the Free Thought Project blog put it so succinctly, quote, "A dozen armed men, dressed for war, were dispatched to a woman's home, killed her dog, and kidnapped her because of some moldy wood and her inability to pay her gas bill. In what world is this considered justice? This is just despicable." Fortunately, the human inhabitants of the house were left unscathed physically this time, but they are suing for unlawful seizure and unlawful infliction of emotional distress for the killing of the dog, and unlawful retaliation. However, no person can go through this and come out emotionally unscathed, especially the child. And all of this over a fucking unpaid utility bill. A SWAT team busting through her door, killing her dog, pointing a gun at her child and threatening him over a goddamned unpaid utility bill. When are we finally going to stand up and say enough of these Gestapo tactics in the police state of America? The second incident today that really rankled my hide was the video taken over the weekend in McKinney, Texas, where several officers responded to an incident called in by a nosy fucking neighbor because she didn't like seeing a bunch of brown kids in the area who were leaving a birthday pool party. Additional calls apparently came in after some of these nosy neighbors began making racist comments to the kids, telling them to go back to Section 8 housing where they belong. The video shows some of the cops acting like complete assholes, running around yelling orders at a bunch of kids who were doing nothing wrong in any way. And then it gets ugly. A supervisor officer on the scene, who has not been identified by the McKinney PD yet, grabbed a 15-year-old girl by her arm and started yanking her around. This girl was seen in the video just prior to this doing nothing but standing there with a group of other kids, so this is a completely unprovoked attack. But fuck, any attack by an armed man on an unarmed female child of 15 is unprovoked, period. The officer is then seen throwing this girl to the ground and dragging her around on the ground by her hair and shoving her face into the ground. At this point, other kids around begin yelling at the officer, who then stands up and pulls his gun out and points it at a couple of other kids and attempts to chase them away. He then puts his gun away and continues to assault the young girl on the ground, climbing on top of her and yanking her around some more, before finally handcuffing her. He left her in handcuffs for nearly half an hour before finally letting her go. Why in the holy fuck is this officer not behind bars for assaulting another person like this? And make no mistake about it, had this been you or I, we would be behind bars. The McKinney PD has issued a statement that this officer was suspended after the incident. Not that this matters. If this case goes just the way that most other cases do, he will be back on the streets in a couple of months terrorizing other citizens. As I said, the McKinney PD has refused to identify the officer, but the internet has done so. He was found to be Corporal Eric Casebolt, a 40-year-old Navy veteran and a cop for 10 years. He is also a vice president of the police union. Want to know how sure Corporal Casebolt is that he won't have any issues out of his suspension? He added the video that shows him assaulting this girl and pointing his gun at unarmed teens on his personal YouTube page, under his list, Police Training. I kid you not. Make no mistake about it, we are living in a police state. I urge each one of you to pick up Radley Balco's book, Rise of the Warrior Cop, The Militarization of America's Police Forces. I urge this only if you really want to know what's going on out there and how we got where we are today. I assure you this book will upset you. It will make you cringe. It will piss you off. It will make you look at things very differently, but you will be looking at these things without blinders on.
Talk the talk. Do you walk the walk?
We've all heard it at least once in our lives, whether it be from some intellectual midget on Facebook trying to shut you down because they don't have any real way to refute your claims, or from a family member who just doesn't understand real freedom. But now I'm going to give you the intellectual ammunition to refute the, quote, if you hate America so much, why don't you just move to Somalia argument. There are several reasons why this is an argument from ignorance, and we will look at several of those reasons here today. If I miss some reasons or you know some better ones, feel free to hit me up on Twitter at the Lava Flow Pod and let me know your thoughts. First and foremost, the reason we don't move to Somalia is because we don't have to, and we shouldn't be expected to. We were either born here and choose to stay, or we chose, of all the places in the world, to move here. As free people, we should be allowed to choose the place we live and to purchase property. The fundamental right that generally all rights come from is the property right. I've said this in other episodes, and I will say it here again. No one has a right to a second of my time, a joule of my energy, an iota of my labor, or an ounce of my property except me. If I have purchased a piece of property wherever I choose, it is mine. and I should not be expected to leave it just because I disagree with you or because my rights are being violated. A perfect analogy of this comes from the anarchistnotebook.com. Now, I couldn't say it better myself, so instead of trying, I'll just read you what they said. Imagine if you moved into a neighborhood. Imagine if the mafia moved in and the Black Hand extorted money from you under threats of violence. Imagine if you complained about it to other neighbors. Imagine if they actually thought the extortion was acceptable because they believed the mafia was keeping them safe. Imagine if you pointed out how the mafia is a criminal organization and commits murder. Imagine if, instead of refuting you, they said, if you don't like this neighborhood, then you can just get out. People who have their rights violated shouldn't be expected to leave their property. It is not their duty to remove themselves from an unjust situation, though sometimes they should if practicality demands it. It is the moral responsibility of the person violating other people's rights to cease that activity. Really, the whole "if you don't like it, you can leave" policy is a form of victim blaming by ignoring the actions of the perpetrator. We don't get out for the same reason a man whose house is being broken into doesn't get out. Where we live isn't the problem. It's the people whose actions violate our rights. We are free to leave if we choose, but we also have a right to stay. Another reason we shouldn't have to leave is that we're not free to leave for several reasons. Did you know that there are only 2 countries in the entire world that tax its citizens no matter where they are in the world? Those 2 countries are Eritrea, a small country in Africa, which taxes its citizens 2%, no matter where in the world they live, and the United States of America, where you are subject to pay taxes on your income at the same level as if you lived in America, and no matter if you're required to pay taxes in the country you move to. And if you do go through all the red tape and expense to move to another country and select a different set of rulers, which is tantamount to selecting a different set of rapists, and go through the expatriation process, the United States will charge you an exit tax. I kid you not. They will charge you for the privilege of telling them to shove it, and that privilege will cost you 30% of all of your assets. So if you sell your $500,000 home and you have $500,000 in the bank, you will be paying the U.S. government $300,000 to tell them you no longer want to be a citizen. And that is after you've already had to go through all of the mountains of red tape. And once you've gone through the expatriation process, you could still be drafted to serve the U.S. government in one of its insane wars for 10 years after your date of expatriation. Talk about insanity. So now that we've seen why you shouldn't have to leave, and how difficult it would be if you did decide to leave, let's actually look at Somalia. Is it truly a libertarian or anarchist utopia? Is it even libertarian or anarchist at all? Somalia, like much of the African continent, is a poor and underdeveloped country. Trying to compare the U.S. to Somalia is apples and oranges. When Somalia was solidly under a state prior to 1991, they were steadily dropping in all quality of life measures that could be reliably seen prior to and after the end of the state. Since the end of the state in Somalia, nearly all of those quality of life measures have improved, including life expectancy, GDP per capita, infant mortality, adult literacy, access to telecommunications, and others. Now, am I jumping on a plane and heading to Somalia tomorrow? Of course not, because it's still very undeveloped compared to our way of living in the U.S. But compared to other African nations, it is improving, and improving faster than most of the other 42 sub-Saharan African countries. Now, Somalia ranks higher than half of all African nations in these areas, and ranks very close to the top in access to telecommunications. Somalia is the 3rd highest improver in life expectancy in the entire continent of Africa since 1991. So things are actually getting better in Somalia since the collapse of the very communist central planning government that ran it into the ground to begin with. But is it a libertarian utopia, or even an anarchy? Of course not. From 2000 until 2004, there was the transitional national government, which then became the transitional federal government in 2004 until 2012. Since 2012, the country has been ruled by the federal government of Somalia, the first permanent central government in the country since the early 90s. This government still does not have control of the entire country or even the entire capital city of Mogadishu, but they sure are working on it. I know you don't care to hear a history of Somalia, nor do I care to give one, but needless to say, from its back and forth switch to Sharia law and many civil wars, it is anything but anarchistic or libertarian. It can even be said, and has been said several times, that the state of Somalia today is due in large part to the central planning government mentality and damage done to the country from the late 1960s to the early 1990s. So Somalia is far from libertarian or anarchist, and it certainly cannot be called either. Remember this the next time that some asshat tells you to move to Somalia. Or you could just tell that asshat that if he loves government running your lives so much, he should just move to North Korea. Thank you for listening to the show this week. As always, I need to thank the best mother for my kids that I could ever ask for, Jessica, for her help with this show, and Sheltered Life for allowing me to use their music. For the show notes to this episode, where I put links and other information that's been on the show, go to thelavaflow.com/13. For the first episode in a long time, I have no iTunes reviews to read. If you want yours read in the next episode, go to thelavaflow.com/iTunes and leave your review today. If you like what this show gives you and you want more of it, and to keep this show ad-free, exercise your free market muscles by going to thelavaflow.com/support and giving a per episode donation of as little as $1 an episode using Patreon or Bitcoin. There are monthly costs associated with doing this show, and I need additional equipment to continue making this show better for you every episode. Until next time, keep striking the root.
Thank you for listening to The Lava Flow at thelavaflow.com. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now at thelavaflow.com/subscribe. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.